Are you ready to be the change? If so, you've come to the right place. You are about to join a movement of entrepreneurs who are empowering people, saving the planet, and turning their passion into profits while creating the lifestyle of their dreams. If you don't believe us, check out our website at entrepreneursforachange.com, a place where you can be inspired, mentored, and supported by a tribe of change-making entrepreneurs just like you. Now, before diving into the interview, I want to encourage you to rate, review, and download Entrepreneurs for a Change on iTunes. This really helps us reach more people with inspiring stories of entrepreneurs who are changing the world. Also, if these stories inspire you to start a world-changing business of your own, head over to our website at entrepreneursforachange.com and download the Business Changemakers Toolkit to get a jumpstart today. Now on to the show. Hello, powerful changemakers. This is Lorna Lee, speaking to you from Southern California, where I am here speaking with Paul Blais over Skype. Now, let me tell you about Paul, because I really admire what Paul has done to explode his podcast audience over using social media. So Paul is a serial entrepreneur, and he's the host of two podcasts, Doubt the Doubts and The Potter's Cast. Now, Paul and I know each other from Podcasters Paradise, which is a community of podcasters started by John Lee Dumas, the host of Entrepreneur on Fire. Now, John Lee Dumas has had amazing success with his podcast. I think he gets well over 1 million downloads a month these days, and Paul, I believe you do too. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think John is either just coming up on 1 million a month. I think the last I heard, he was like chasing it, and that was like last month. I heard him say something like that in an interview with what was that? It was on Creative Live. He was doing a class, and I think he was chasing 1 million a month. Not quite there yet, but I could be wrong. He totally could be. In the last 30 days, we hit 1.8 million in the last 30 days for Doubt the Doubts. So John is rocking and rolling,
and so are you.
Yeah.
Great. So I can't wait to discover your secrets on how to use social media to explode your iTunes audience. Now, first, I'd like to really understand who you are and where you came from. What is your business and what inspires you to do these podcasts?
Well, my background is that I have been an entrepreneur, basically, I feel like that word's kind of getting a bit overused, entrepreneur, but I still use it a lot. But let's just say a guy that does his own gig. That's what I've done most of my adult life. I've worked for other businesses. I've done other deals, but for the most part, I really like doing my own gig. So what that looks like is that I have had a number of businesses that I've done for profit. I've even started some nonprofits. I've even started some that were supposed to be for profit that ended up being as nonprofit because we just didn't make any money off it. So my main business that I've ran for the last little while was a company called The Electric Connection. The Electric Connection was it still is, but it's more closer to was than is. But it was a high-end lighting design, custom home type of a business where I would go in and design everything that needed a system involved in it, basically. So it was lighting system, security system, sound system, home theater system, electrical design. So anytime you add the word system, you're also adding just money to the project. So we can easily take a project from a $10,000 project to a $30,000 project. Or I even have one project that we did a bid. I think my bid was at $25,000 was our original bid. By the time we were done doing the job, I think we exceeded $150,000 for it. So it's all high-end, beautiful houses. So I'm very fortunate to be able to have been able to work with that caliber of builder and the customers that really enjoy nice things. It's a huge pleasure for me. So that's kind of my background. But then I was diagnosed with cancer last year in 2013. And with that came the reality that I needed my body to work. And without a working body, I no longer had a working income. My income was devastated. So, like I've been in the last since I was diagnosed in February, I've been off work for 11 months where I just couldn't. I've been in surgery or treatment or surgery. that was kind of actually went from surgery to treatment, back to surgery, and then I've had a number of treatments since then. So it's been quite the process. So I had to figure out, Lauren, a way to be able to make a living without having to make my body work. So I kind of stumbled on this world of podcasting and saw the potential for it, and I went after it. I said, "This is it, man. I can be able to make a living doing this. I can make a living talking to people." Lorna, I love to talk to people, so I said, I'm going for it. Now, it's not exactly what we've been sold. I mean, I feel like guys have sold a lot of new podcasters kind of a brochure, a travel brochure, whereas what we thought we were buying was a roadmap, and instead of getting that roadmap, we end up getting the travel brochure. And so I had to kind of figure out, after I realized that what I was buying was the brochure, the dream, the picture of what the end result possibly could be, I had to figure out, well, if that's what I really needed the whole time was a roadmap, I had to figure out what that roadmap is. And that's a whole different deal altogether, is figuring out how to get to that point of where you can turn your cast into cash. And that was the deal.
Yeah, so that's interesting how you mentioned brochure versus the actual, roadmap, so to speak, because I think I went through a similar journey with podcasting as well. One thing I discovered in that journey, when I discovered that what I had acquired was also kind of a brochure, is that a podcast really isn't a business. I mean, podcasting is a lot of fun. I really enjoy talking to, all these amazing, guests,
right,
like people like you and, many of the people whose, wisdom and advice I've certainly benefited from. But, to think of podcasting as a business, you really have to have pretty huge numbers to actually start to directly monetize your podcast. So what ends up happening for a lot of podcasters...
I don't agree with that.
You don't?
I don't think
really? Okay.
Numbers.
Tell me.
I think you have to have significant numbers. Significant means at least 1,000 downloads per episode. That's significant. Anything less than that is really not going to be able to be of too much value. But having said that, it depends on your niche too, or niche, depending on whether you want to say niche or niche. But it depends on where you're going to be. Like, for instance, with the Potter's Cast, my second podcast that I started in April, that show is fully funded for the fourth quarter, and it was fully funded through the third quarter and partially funded through the second quarter. No, wait, I take it back. Partially funded through the third quarter. So that's when I started to make a living off it, or make money off it, and now it's fully funded. And
by who?
That was with a show that was getting minimum of 1,000 downloads per episode. That's what I was guaranteeing. And because it was a niche product, niche show, that made that show of value to the ceramic industry, which is what that show is all about, the Potter's Cast. So I could go to a specific companies, like I've got Georgies.com and also Scut.com. Scut is a kiln company, and Georgies is a company that provides products for ceramic artists, whether you're a potter or a fine arts artist that does clay. The point is that those two are always looking for outlets to be able to advertise, and I have the perfect audience for them, the perfect audience. So I can make money off of selling to that. Now, we've grown since then. I'm getting 5,000 downloads an episode now with that show. And I haven't raised my prices with them yet, but I need to. And I was guaranteeing them 1,000 downloads an episode with the idea that I knew I was getting minimum of 2,000. And then when it came time for the fourth quarter to come, and it came time to renew the contracts, I went from I started to charge. I kept it at the same place even though I knew that by that point I was getting 4,000 to 5,000 downloads an episode. I just want to bring my companies, my advertisers, a very strong return for their investment, return on their ROI. So they're getting a lot more exposure than they were before. So I don't agree that you have to have huge numbers. In our niche now, with this, the entrepreneur niche, we have been so inundated with content creation. not with listeners, but content creation has been huge. So the market is very, very difficult in this market to find a really good, to find customers, or I should say advertisers that advertise on our show. There's a lot of competition. And yes, in this genre, you do need to have really good high numbers to do that. And then I've got a lot of opinions about what those high numbers mean, and also what type of advertising that we do, or how we can monetize that. Because there's definitely tactics for that are not necessarily just doing what I'm doing with the Potter's Cast, that to be able to monetize that. So that's my thought. So that was my interruption, and I apologize for
not a problem at all. That was a good interruption, because I'm so glad you debunked this idea, because I had this sense that you needed to get, in the tens of thousands of monthly downloads to even become remotely interesting to advertisers. But I'm glad that you've distinguished the fact that it does definitely depend on your niche, and certainly the entrepreneurial market is very oversaturated. I would completely agree with you. It seems like there's a new podcast almost every day that comes out about entrepreneurs, and I see the same guests showing up on those shows. It's like, okay, well, like how many more times can we listen to this person? I'm sure they have a lot to share, but I can imagine from the audience perspective might get a little ADD. Yeah, and I agree with you. This is, the thing about podcasting is that the gurus, and I use that term a little bit loosely, but let's just say the people that are selling to podcasters, they are telling us without reservation, they're saying that podcasting is exploding, and that the opportunities are seemingly limitless, and they do these great sales pitches of like, look how much money I'm making at this. Now let me tell you what I did. And then that's what we're buying when we do it. We're buying that story. But the reality is that there has not been a huge explosion in podcasting as far as listeners go. Listeners, in the last 2 years, the listenership in America was 12% of Americans 2 years ago was listening to podcasts, or even knew what a podcast was. We're not talking about people that are like really, they're full-on geeks and that's all they ever listen to. That segment of America grew from 12% in 2 years to 15%, which is what we currently are right now. 15% from 12 to 15%, we don't call that a tidal wave. We call that a ripple. That has been a very, very small, nearly insignificant growth. That's like 1.5% growth. If we were talking about putting our money in a place where it's going to have growth, if all we're getting is a 1.5% return on our income of our investment, we'd be pulling out of our money from that place and putting it somewhere else. So the tidal wave has not been in listenership. The tidal wave has been in podcasters showing up to try to make a living off of it. So we have this huge, huge, huge influx of podcasters, such as yourself and me, that have shown up to try to make a living off of this, and we're fishing from the same little pond that we're supposed to try to draw from to be able to get those kind of crazy download numbers, and it's just not going to happen. That's why most podcasters right now are only getting about 144 downloads per episode, or 109, depending upon how you do the math for this stuff. That's why we're only getting that many downloads per episode, is because there's just not a big enough listening audience out there yet. Now, will it come? Maybe. With the things that are going on with iTunes right now, making podcasting in a native app on their iPhone that you can't get rid of, yeah, that'll help. Making it native to cars, their inboard dashboard that they're going to have Stitcher on every car that's out there. They have specific models that are out there. They're going to have those on there. Yeah, that'll help. But let's be honest. Just because they're going to be in the dashboard of cars, who's buying brand new cars? The highly educated, and also the wealthy. And so the general population of America, which is the vast number of people that are making less than $100,000 a year, are not out buying these brand new cars. They're going to have the in-dash access to podcasts. Therefore, we're going to see the same slow, methodical growth that we've seen in the past. I see going to be taking place for the next 2 years until those new cars become used cars
That's when we'll start to see the growth. When those new cars become the used cars, then we'll see more growth in that. But right now, I don't see a huge tidal wave coming. I see potential for a lot of growth, but as far as current podcast listeners, I don't see huge growth. That's why it's so difficult for everybody to be getting traction, because they're all trying to fish from one place, iTunes. Not going to grow.
Wow. Okay, that's really a good wake-up call. So, Paul...
But nobody's teaching that, Lorna. Nobody out there will tell you that. Everybody's going to tell you this is how you get new and noteworthy. This is how you grow your audience on iTunes. This is how you grow your audience in Stitcher. That's all well and good, but it's false, because you can only throw so many fishing lines in a pond to where there's just not enough fish out there. So not everybody's going to be catching fish. That's just the sad reality right now.
I agree with you. I see a similar thing too, where you have gurus teaching email list building, but they don't necessarily tell you that there's different quality leads that you can get from different sources. So it's a lot of it's like the devil's in the details, and so I'm really glad that you are being so direct and frank and just spelling it out. So I'm kind of curious to know, Paul, do you think that there is any value to getting into podcasting if you're a new and aspiring podcaster?
Oh, yeah, there's value in it. There's value in it, totally. But I think we need to kind of dispel some of those ideas that it's a sprint. It's not a sprint for, to a living. And actually, it depends. Let me just say this, Lauren. It depends on the purpose. If your purpose is for fun and your purpose is to have a neat hobby, then absolutely. Then we can totally do that. If your purpose is to make a bigger impact in the world, you are definitely building a platform that way. Is it possible to grow your audience from 0 to 1 million? Absolutely, it totally is. Because someone else has already done it. That's proven the point that it can be done. So, yeah, there's value in it. What we need to do, though, is to go into it not with the idea that I can make a sprint to the money, 6 months to 6 figures. That's probably not going to happen. More than likely what you got to do is 6 months to figure out what you were taught was not working. Now figure out. That's the 6%.
Didn't John Lee Dumas go from 6 months to 6 figures?
He did, but let's pick apart John Lee Dumas. The guy's a genius. He's a really bright guy, really good guy. Love John Lee Dumas. Here's what the difference between him and most podcasters. He for one, came into it before there was a tidal wave of content. Secondly, he's the boulder that was thrown in the middle of the pond that created the ripple effect of bringing in a lot of people that wanted to get into podcasting. So he's a big reason why a lot of people jumped into the podcasting world, because his story is 6 months to 6 figures. That is his story. He also, though, before he ever made a dime, he spent $13,000 of his own income out of his bank account in investing in infrastructure, VAs, and education. The vast majority of podcasters coming into podcasting do not have $13,000 of disposable income to be able to throw at that. Nor does the vast majority of podcasters right now have the ability to go full time, where they don't. Not only do they, when I say $13,000 of income, that's not including the work time that he quit, because he quit his job and he did this full time before he even podcasted. He had quit and gone full time in this. So he's a different bird. We all have to invest that $13,000, whether it is in real cash or real sweat equity. We have to pay the dues, because any business out there, as an entrepreneur, I know it takes money to make money. You have to invest in it somehow. Whether that money, we'll just call that resources. It takes treasure to cash in, before you can find more treasure. And your treasure is probably going to be your time and your time. And then you got to go through the learning process of how to do this also. So if you are planning on doing it for pleasure, for fun, absolutely it's worth it. If you're planning on doing it for a business, then there's very specific things you have to be thinking about to be able to do it as a business. Because I look at this as not just a podcast that I'm podcasting. I'm looking at this as a media business. And that's how we've got to be thinking about it. It's just a media business.
Okay, so how do we put on our media business hats? What would you recommend to us to start thinking about how we do podcasting?
Okay, number one is that you've got to think volume also. You have to think growth. And that is true for any business. Every business has to be reaching customers, okay? That you have to be reaching customers. So in order to be successful at that, you have to be growing that customer base. Now, you can get to a point where you have a big enough customer base and now you just maintain, and that's okay. You can do that. But in an information-driven business, you have to be expanding that customer base. So volume of listeners is critical. I have heard, I pause for dramatic emphasis, Lorna, because I've been in so many podcast webinars where people are complaining that they're only getting 100, 150 downloads a day or an episode on their podcast. And what these other people will say, they'll say, well, wait a minute, stop and think about it. If you had a room full of 100 people in there, think about it, and they were all listening to you, that would be amazing. So pat yourself on the back. That's an amazing accomplishment. Another dramatic pause. Because that's a bunch of bull. You would never come into any business and think that as an electrical contractor, if I was an electrical in my business, if I had one customer, I would not be blown away at the fact that I have one customer. Think about it, Paul. You have one contractor who listens to your every word and lets you put wire in that house. That would make me, that's what we call bankruptcy, one customer. And when you come to podcasting, it is not true that you need to be excited about having 101 downloads. What you need to be excited about is figuring out how to get 101,000 downloads. That's what you got to get excited about. And that's where you have to create the volume. So number one, volume is critical. You have to be reaching a lot of customers. Number two, and this is one of the things, Lorna, that I have really, really blown it on, and I'm trying to correct, is not only do you have to have volume of listeners, and the volume of listeners is critical in case if you ever plan on doing any type of ad space marketing, then that matters for that purpose. But I think that there's all sorts of different ways to make money from your there's a few different ways to make money from your podcast, and ad space advertising is one of them, because that's what most of us dream of, is having a great show, good enough to where 99 Designs comes and says, let me be a sponsor of your show. Now, that's all well and good. That's what most podcasters dream about. But having said that, now the second step is the area that I made a mistake in, is not only listeners, but list. So listeners and list. And so we need to be thinking, if we are in an information-based media business, we have to be building that list. The list is specifically an email list, because here's the gig, Lorna. We are using, when you make all of your marketing strategy based upon iTunes, you are now functioning on rented space. You are building a business on rented property. The same is true as if with any social media stuff. When you went onto Facebook and you build a business on that type of on social media for Facebook, it's rented space. And Facebook is the perfect example of why it's so critical to get people off of there and onto your list, because Facebook demonstrated within the last year or so, within that short period of time, they have made it more and more difficult for me to go to my audience, my followers, my friends on Facebook, and to cut off my ability to reach them. They've now put such a throttle on that at most, whenever I post anything, I will reach about 2 to 10%, depending upon a couple of variables. But that's the most I can reach, unless I say, "Hey, Facebook, how about I slip you $100? Let me reach more people. Let me get a hold of more of my friends." that I've cultivated relationships with. Then they'll say, okay, for $100, I'll do that for you. And they keep putting those throttles on there. Now, and this is a perfect example, is that when I was doing my webinar for Podcast Movement, I'm sorry, not Podcast Movement, podcastafterburner.com, when I was putting together that webinar, I went onto Facebook and I personally wrote emails to every one of my podcast friends. I just wrote them, and this was not like, a shotgun thing where I loaded up and then just clicked all my friends and just said, hey, Lorna and Pat Flynn and so on and so forth, just people that I'm friends with on Facebook. It wasn't like that, and then just send out one big email and it hits all these people in one shot. That's not what I did. I wrote to each person individually, telling them about my event that was coming up. And it took me about 8 to 10 hours to do that process of writing all those people, okay? Now, granted, I did do some copy and pasting, but the point is it was still individual. Facebook came and warned me and said, Paul, if you keep this up, we're going to turn off your instant messaging ability. We're going to turn that off. You won't be able to do that with anybody ever again. So they basically, because what I was trying to do is I was trying to do it for free, and they don't want that. They want me to pay the rent. Now, I get that I get it. They're a business. They're entrepreneurs. They have to make money, publicly traded company. I get it. They have to make money. But I feel a little duped in building a bunch of friends on there, and I can't tell them all about the same idea individually. I'm not allowed to do that. They'll cut me off from Facebook and won't let me do it anymore. So we have to get them off of their platform and get them onto our list. So listeners and lists are the two things that are really critical. The next thing you have to build is, because we are a media company, you have to build content. You have to be putting lots of content out. Whether that is, if you're a blogger, that's a media company, and you want to be able to make money off your blog, you have to be putting out lots of blogs, or at least really good blogs that come out consistently. If you're a podcaster, you have to make sure that you are on time with your show. You get it out on time. Yesterday it was for me. Today we're recording on November the 17th, 2014. And yesterday was a day where I got busy doing other things. And I was just about to head off to bed that it dawned on me that my episode for today, episode number 262, had not been uploaded nor even edited properly. So, and it dawned on me that, I got to do my show. So I had to sit up instead of going to bed, I had to stay awake for the next hour and a half putting everything together, because I had to collect it, find the notes, and do this. I'll do all this stuff that, plus I watched a little YouTube and goofed around a little bit. So that is part of the hour and a half, I'll admit. But nonetheless, it was still my bedtime got postponed because I had to get it out on time. It had to be available. I couldn't just wake up in the morning and say, I'll do it in the morning, and then just hit it up by sometime tomorrow, and that'll be good enough. Still the same release date. Nobody's going to know. No, we have to do it all on time and get it out there. So here we go. Listeners, list, and content. Those are the three things that we have to be building. That content can be divided into a couple of things. It needs to be going towards it needs to be going to our people on our list. It needs to be going out to trying to find people to get onto our list. And it needs to be able to go out and be just good content for other people to consume. So there's three purposes for that content that we're supposed to be creating it for. Now, the last thing is marketing. We have to market our shows. I wish I could tell you off the top of my head about the name of this company. There was two major companies at the turn of the last century that were soda companies. And I can't tell you the name of the first one because they didn't market. But the second company I can totally tell you the name of because they did market. They're called Coca-Cola. The Coca-Cola company blew up and grew like crazy because they did these crazy marketing things. Like they created a Santa Claus that was in a red suit with the white ruffles around it, put that out there in such a big way that people started to associate Coca-Cola with Santa Claus. And so they did these amazing marketing tactics. And I can't remember that other soda company because they didn't have a marketing tactic. They didn't have a way to get their message out to other people. So that's why I say for us, What most podcasters are doing is they're trying to do their podcasting only through word of mouth. And though that is strong and good, it's not necessarily the best way. Most are trying to do it through iTunes. And though that's strong and good, it's a really fished out platform because, like I said, 15% of America is only grown by 15% or by 3%, and we have a huge, huge, huge number of people that are trying to do the exact same thing that I am. So those are the 4 things that I say are really critical for a media type business.
You definitely bring up a number of really important points. So I want to cycle back to one of the points that you made, which was around getting the listeners onto your list. Now, given the fact that most people are listening to the podcast as they're shopping for groceries or in their car, how do you get those people, your audience, onto your email list?
Okay, so that's a great question. Let me tell you the things that I am discovering, not the things that I am practicing, okay? Because those are 2 different things, the discovering and what I am moving towards, and that's what I'm heading towards, okay? For one, is that on your website, you should have a place where you do capture people's email addresses, okay? Because the list is the thing that you own. What I have on Facebook, what I have on Twitter, what I have on Instagram, or what I have on Pinterest, or what I have even in iTunes, those platforms are other people's customers. They're not mine, right? So what I want to do is have as many opportunities to drive people to, those are what we call the spokes. And the hub is now where our real business can take place, okay? So the hub is how we're going to be directing people back to the hub, and that's that list, okay? The list is what we can sell to. So on our show, on our website, which could be where our show notes page is, where we do our blogging, email capture there, a pop-up there, a landing page that people are interested in. But also now when we go to the other platforms like Facebook, we should be giving them reasons to leave Facebook and come to our site and to get onto our list there also. But now let's talk about specifically in a podcast, okay? In the podcast, what we ought to be doing is giving away a compelling reason to want to go to our website to sign up. Now, the best place to put that could be or should be at the end of the show, in the last, because that's where you're going to find the committed fans have listened through all the way to the end. So those are the people that are like, oh yeah, I love Lorna. I got to hear every word that comes out of Lorna's podcast, because everything that comes off of this show is that valuable. I'm going to listen to the end. And so at the end is a great place because you're going to be reaching your committed fan base. So you put at the end of your show, you put a compelling reason to go there. Now, for instance, Chris Ducker at the end of his show, he has the New Business Podcast. He has at the end of his show the 7-day boot camp for entrepreneurs. And at the end of each one of them, he says this deal. It's part of his outtake is. You've been listening to Chris Ducker or the New Business Podcast. Don't miss out on our 7-day boot camp where I'll give you actionable advice to yada yada yada. So then he tells you where to go get onto that list. That little thing has brought to him, because I heard him just talk about this the other day, 10,000 people to his email list. Lorna, I am one of them.
Wow. Okay, so that must be really compelling, because I've got these calls to actions in the beginning and at the end, but I can't say that I've gotten 10,000 people to sign up for my email list just through iTunes.
Well, he didn't do that. Change that, not just through iTunes. It's through his podcast. That's 2 different things.
Oh, okay. All right.
This is through his podcast. He's not doing that through iTunes. Now, he happens to be on iTunes, yes, but he puts that on his podcast. And so that also didn't happen overnight, those 10,000. He didn't put it out there one time and get 10,000. This has been since he started his podcast. The New Business Podcast has now been going, I think, for a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I can't remember how long it's been going, but he's been going for a while. And so that's how many he's brought in over that time. So that's still a pretty significant number, even though it's been over a 2-year period. That's a significant number, and he markets to that group of people quite consistently. So because I'm on his emailing list, I get his emails from him on about 1 to 3 times a week. He sends out some kind of communique telling us what's going on, some tips, tactics, tools, and then he'll sell to us every once in a while. And he does well. He does very well. So giving that compelling reason to go to your website, and it could be something like if you've got the call to action on yours, that call to action could be like, hey, here's my 5 top tools that every entrepreneur should use. And that's one of the things that I do is I have the top tools that I should use, that people could use for an entrepreneurship. And so they go there, they give me their email address, they get that list of that PDF file. It can just be a PDF file, but something that's compelling. And that'll drive people to your email list.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned putting out lots of content on time. So this is really interesting because I've looked at a lot of different podcasts, and some people are absolutely religious about publishing at the same time on the same date. And other podcasters are a bit more lackadaisical. And I have to say, like, you know, in my process, I do my best to publish my show every Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. Sometimes it comes out at 7 or 9, but you know, we do our best to get it out on the same time. Now tell me, do people notice? Do people care? What, you know, like if you publish a little off your schedule, do you get a surge of protests and people emailing or tweeting or Facebooking you like, hey, where's the episode? I mean, how do you know that this is an important factor, the timeliness?
Well, I've always released at the right time, so I wouldn't have a great answer on that. I've always kept it comes out every day at the same time. So I can't remember an instance, Lorna, where it came out later in the day or not, because I don't think I've ever done that. I've always had it come out at the same time. So let me just say this then, because you're bringing out a good point. Podcast episodes are perennial. So say if I did exactly what you suggested, you don't get out until 9 o'clock that morning. That may not matter as much as I put as I think it is, as important as I think it is, because they can pick it up the next morning. Especially if they're subscribed, they're going to show up. It's going to just show up in their thing. It's going to download when it's available. So. But the thing is that I reason from this is that if people are on a set schedule and they are used to listening to you on Tuesday mornings, it'll be a little bit frustrating for them to go, oh, I don't know, it's not on time. You know, they may get, you know, frustrated it wasn't available. Now just think about, if we're talking about a media company, every media company is like this, is that NBC has a schedule that their stuff comes out on. It comes out at the same time every week. The newspaper is printed every day at the same time. Radio stations have their shows start and end at the same time. When we talk about a media company, that's what professionalism does. Professionalism has a schedule and they keep with it. When we tell someone that it's going to be that way, man, it goes a long ways to do that. If I go into off the online world and into just the electrical contracting, if I tell a customer it's going to be here by such and such a date and it's not, then I have to account for that. So that's why I say, yeah, it's a little bit more important than just being lackadaisical. I think it helps to show our level of commitment. Now, having said that, there are some companies, there are some podcasts that I know of that in general, they are episodic in nature. They will do, or they're like more like I should say, they're more like a season in nature. So I think that, for instance, like This Is Your Life podcast with Michael Hyatt. He does them in seasons, if I'm not mistaken, where he'll put out, 10 or 15, and then he takes a break, and then he puts out 10 or 15 more, and he takes a break. So that can totally work. Or if you go to Alex Bloomberg, who puts it out about every 2 weeks. I don't think he has an exact day that comes out on, but it comes out about every 2 weeks. The guy's number one in the world right now with his podcast as far as business goes. I mean, the guy's rocking and rolling. He's getting by his third episode, he was getting sponsors coming and giving him $6,000 an episode just for the privilege of being on his show because. But he's coming into it with a huge audience, and people are going to be listening to it, to him very dedicated. Most of us don't have that huge audience that we're dragging along with us into the podcast world. Most of us are coming into it with zero, and so it becomes a little bit more important for us to be even that much more ambitious with being on time. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yeah. Okay, great. So I'm curious to know then, okay, so definitely you mentioned getting the episodes out to the people on your list. So does that mean every episode that you publish, that email goes out to your list the same day or next day?
No. I don't use my list to advertise my episodes. I do know of people who do that. Like, for instance, Jeff Goings does that with his podcast about he podcasts about writing. That's what his whole deal is. He does send out an email to everybody, letting everybody on his list know that he's got a podcast episode that's out there, and he gives a little explanation to that. To me, that doesn't matter so much to me. But that's because, and Lorna, let me just say this: I could be wrong because I'm just a guy. I'm getting $1.8 million or downloads per episode or in the last 30 days, but that doesn't mean that I'm the expert. I'm just giving you my opinion at this point, okay? So Jeff Goings is doing this, and he does do that for every episode. Me, I don't do that because I feel like my list needs to be treated differently than that. So I use that list to give tips. I give that list to use to build relationships and to have an opportunity to sell something.
Yeah, I'm thinking about just doing like monthly newsletters with a roundup of my podcast episode, just to make sure that people are getting them. But sometimes people are busy and they might just miss the episodes on their iTunes or Stitcher. So it's always kind of nice to have an extra prompt because we are in a ADD social media information overloaded world. So it's always kind of nice to have an extra reminder.
Yeah, and there's nothing immoral, illegal, or fattening about what you just talked about. It's. I think that it's a personal preference. You're an entrepreneur. You can do it any way you want to. There's no rules to being an entrepreneur except that you have to be making money. That's the only rule about entrepreneurship. So, so that's if we're doing that, then we're doing okay. Now, so if you can treat your list the way you want to, I just want to make sure that they're getting a bang for my buck. For their buck, they gave me the privilege of having and their email address. I want to make sure that I'm treating that with respect. Now, it could be very well. You said something that was really good. Is that we do live in a society where lots of things are jockeying for position for our listeners' attention, and so they may not listen to every episode. In fact, that's probably more likely than not. Is that most people won't listen to every episode. And that should be okay. So because they don't listen to every episode, sometimes it's good to send out a reminder saying, hey, if you are interested in yada, 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 this is a good one for you. And so that would be really good. The roundup at the end of the month could be really helpful with links to every one of them, perhaps with a direct download, or you've got the iTunes or your website or whatever, however you're going to do that, you would put that link in there, and then you can get some more traction that way for your downloads, definitely.
Okay, awesome. I just want to be mindful of time because you are such a wealth of information, and I really want to get to the juicy nugget of how do you reach people beyond iTunes? Now, you had mentioned that you've been leveraging social media to get to wider audiences. I'd love to know, like, what has been working for you? Like, what are some of the most effective strategies you found to grow your audience listenership?
Yeah, good question, and thanks for watching the clock for me. I've been watching that clock tick by here too, and so yeah. So let me just back up and just reiterate that 15% of America knows what a podcast is and listens to them. So that's the first thing to remember. Now, the second thing to remember is that the number one podcast promoter right now is iTunes. So that's the second thing to remember. But the biggest problem with iTunes is that there is way more content than listenership. There's way more content than listenership. So we have to say iTunes is not necessarily the biggest place or the best place to be focusing on. Yes, focus there, but not put all of our focus on there. When I think in terms of, 15% of Americans are not listening to 15% of Americans are listening to iTunes. That means that 85% are not, and they don't even know what a podcast is. So I want to market to them. When they come into podcasting, I want them to discover me first. Let me give you an example of that. With the Potter's Cast, I had a guest on my show. I interviewed her. In fact, I think her episode was just released this last week, and I believe, I'm doing this from memory, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Bianca Groves that I was interviewing. When we finished the interview, I so wish I had left my recorder on, because what she said was so precious to me personally, and now it's just a memory. I can't go back and re-listen to it, again and again and again, because it was that precious. She said that the Potter's Cast was the second episode or the second podcast she'd ever listened to. The first one was This American Life, which is what Alex Bloomberg is from, but that was her first podcast. The second podcast she ever discovered was the Potter's Cast, and that was when I first released the show. So I had just released it, she discovered it, she downloaded, and she's been a faithful listener since then. And then I wrote to her randomly to be a guest on my show, and she was so shocked and frightened about coming on the show, because she thought she was so admiring of all the other guests that we had that she thought, I am not even in the same league, is what she felt like. It's just not true. She's an amazing artist. So, but that was so precious to me to find that we reached someone that was not part of the 15%. I brought her into the fold, but she was not part of the 15% before that, right? So I helped to bring her in the fold. I mean, I've got to admit, This American Life helped also. Okay, I'm gonna give that to them. But
okay, so how did you bring her into the fold? How do we bring these people into the fold?
Yeah. So I've stopped marketing towards iTunes. In other words, I don't care where I rank in iTunes, which is what everybody is so concerned about, right? Is getting really worthy, because that's what everybody says you have to be, is you got to be ranked here and ranked there. Now that stuff is important, yes, because you are still marketing to the people that do come to iTunes, but that's not the end all. So what I did for both of my shows is I do a really minimal, super minimal. Well, actually, let me change this. I do all of my marketing on social media. Now, when I'm saying minimal, I do a little bit on Facebook, because I've lost interest in Facebook. I don't believe. I know that there's people like Valerie Shupman that are and Nick Unsworth. They just wrote a book on this, and probably be a really good book to get out and read. And they believe very deeply in the marketing on Facebook. Okay. I personally am not a fan of it, because they're going to change the rules. Facebook will change the rules the next month. They'll change the rules a month after that, and we never know where the target is. So it's always changing. So I'm not a big fan of that. So I just do minimal marketing on there, just like episode released today, and that was it. So the rest of it is I go to, because I've got two shows. One is very informational. The other one, actually I would say both of them are informational, but one of them is philosophy and idea driven, and the other one is on a subject that is very visual. So with the Potter's Cast, it's a very visual driven topic, pottery. So I do a lot of marketing on Pinterest and on Instagram because both of those platforms are very visual. I can post a picture on Instagram and it'll reach, a few hundred people right off the bat. People are like checking out that pottery, that picture that I just released, right? I can go onto Instagram, or not Instagram, Pinterest, and we'll have my wife runs that part of it. She does all the stuff on Pinterest, and she'll put on there all the pictures from each episode, because I'll have like 8 to 10 pictures for each potter, each artist that we have on our show, and then we put those in the show notes page. So we post all those also on Pinterest. Those photos have direct links going directly back to my website, where they discover, oh, this isn't just a pretty face. This also has a lot of informational content here, and so they can read what was said. They can also have an opportunity to click and listen to what's being said, so they can find the podcast there. And when I look at my metrics for the Potter's Cast, the website page, I see a lot of traffic comes directly from Pinterest, and we get a lot of people finding that show, to the tune of, in the last 30 days with that show, we have 105,000 downloads in the last 30 days from it. So that's a lot of traffic that's being driven to that show, and it's growing that show.
Now, what about Doubt the Doubts, which is more ideas-driven and business-related?
Yeah, I'm going back, and that's where I was heading to next. Now, I do know of people that do the same thing with Pinterest with that, and they'll do photographs on there, and then they'll put some kind of bio or a quote from the show, and it'll be in there, and it'll be a link back to their show notes page, and that's all good too. That works. I just have found that it's not as effective because people aren't usually clicking through those type of images as readily. So with that show, with Doubt the Doubts, I put a lot of emphasis on doing Twitter marketing with that show. And so I'm trying to reach a people group that is tech savvy, because they're at least on
Twitter. Thank
you. I had a brain fog came in and then it settled and it wouldn't leave. So thank you. So on Twitter, that's a group that is going to be tech savvy, but also the beautiful thing about it is the vast majority of them, vast majority of them have in their hand the very device that I want them to listen to my show with. They've got a smartphone, a smart device that is more than likely not an iPhone, but more than likely a Droid of some kind of smartphone, because that's by far the biggest market that's out there is the non-iPhone smartphones. They have a huge hold in the marketplace. Now, the reason iPhones are the industry standard is because I did air quotes there. You really have a hard time seeing those on a podcast. But the reason that they become the industry standard is because they only have a couple models. It's the iPhone. Yeah, it's the 4, it's the 4S, it's the 5S, it's the 5, the 6. Yes, but it's the iPhone. With the Android phones, you have like 50, 60, 100 different types of droids that are out there. That genre of phones. There's a bunch of different types, but they all use a very similar operating system. So the reason, anyhow, they're holding the exact device I want them to be listening to my show on. So Twitter is a great tool that I send people to. Now, I'm really persnickety in the way that I market that. I send out tweets that are very effective in grab, and actually, Lorna, there's a whole lot more to this than just strictly doing just a good Twitter account. I also really believe highly in making sure your show is worthy of marketing in this way, because if you just market the way that I'm going to describe here in just a moment, you're just going to get traffic with no conversions. We want to get conversions. We want them to become rabid fans of the show, okay? So that we're not going to talk about that part of it. We're just going to assume that we've got a good show and it's structured correctly for this type of marketing, okay? That we're just going to assume that, and we'll have to deal with that at another time. But when I start thinking about that type of marketing, like I said, I'm very persnickety on how that should go. I believe in something looking clean. When I do my electrical wiring, I want my houses to be amazing when they're done. So I want it to be pleasing to the eye. If it's not pleasing to the eye, then people are going to click away. They're going to go right past it. And now the way that I look at it is this way: is that I look at it in terms of, I've got a 3-part process for building a tweet that is going to get traction for anything that you are trying to market, be it a podcast, a blog, a product. There's 3 parts that I believe need to be added together, and the 3 shall not be mixed. Part 1, they have to have the bait. That's the very first thing that the eyeball sees when they're looking at that. When I say the bait, what we want to do is think in terms of a juicy tidbit that someone would love to grab a hold of and eat, okay? They say, I want to consume that. If you're thinking about fishing, you want it to be, you want that to be a beautiful lure, you want it to be a beautiful worm, you want it to be a beautiful something, a bait that is trying to get someone to take the bite. So that's the first thing. Bait is the first thing. Then you have plus bit.ly. The next thing I want to have on that construction is I've got the bait, but then the bit.ly is basically, it's the hook. It's the URL. It's the URL shortener. Now I say bit.ly because it's the most trusted URL shortener. It's better than an Owly. It gets more click-throughs than Owly. It gets more click-throughs than Tiny URL. It gets more click-throughs than Google's URL shortener. It is the best URL shortener out there. It gets on average of about 9% more click-throughs than the other ones. Now, 9% may not sound like a big number, but because it is 9%, that means more. So therefore, I go with bit.ly instead of the other ones, because more people will just click on bit.lys. Now, the bit.ly is the hook. That's where I'm trying to get them to bite. So I've got this juicy tidbit at the very beginning, and the very next thing I want them to see is where I want them to go to, is that hook. They're going to click on that, and they're going to go somewhere very specific that I am going to send them to. Now, that's going to be one of 3 places that I'm going to describe. You want to send them to your website. You want to send, well, I'm going to say 4 places, okay? And actually, there can be a multitude of places, but I'm going to just, for the sake of conversation here, I'm going to give you 4. You send them to your website. You send them to iTunes. You send them to Stitcher. And you send them to a direct download from Libsyn. So those are and then you could also do more than that. Like you could have a SoundCloud. You could send them to a SoundCloud player. You could send them to iHeartRadio if you're on there. If you're on Blueberry, you could send them to a Blueberry player. Any place where that product that you've created, that hook, anywhere where your podcast can be listened to, or your blog post for that matter, wherever it's going to be consumed, that's where you would send them to, is any one of those places. But the most common places are your website, iTunes, Stitcher, and a direct download. So those are the 3 things. So that's your hook, the bit.ly. So you got your bait, your bit.ly. The last thing is your boost. Where you're going to put that bait. Going back to the fisherman's deal, think of about in terms of like if you're a fisherman. Or Lorna, I'm sorry, a fisher person.
Fisherwoman.
Fisherwoman, yes. If you're a fisherwoman and you're standing up in the front of that bass boat and you're trying to get that bait in a specific spot where you know the fish are going to be biting, you just don't throw that thing willy-nilly wherever. You want to send it to a specific spot, a specific location where you know it's going to be, the bait will be in front of the audience that you want. The bait is covering the hook, and the boost is telling you where you're putting that. It might be that old snarled, fallen over tree that's got a big old ancient bass living there or trout.
So what is the boost in the world of
the
Twitter?
Boost, here's what the boost is. The boost now is the hashtag marketing. The hashtag is doing one of two things. It has a targeted topic or a targeted crowd. So you are either targeting a specific topic or subject that you want that bait is about, that the bit.ly is about. You are giving them you're giving them the topic, the people that topic that people will be interested in is going to be part of that, reflecting back to the front bait thing, right? So it's also going to be targeting specific people. So, for instance, with my particular show, I have Doubt the Doubts. I will put in there, Lorna, I'll put in there business, hashtag business, because a particular subject might be related to business. This isn't going to be the way it is all the time. Well, let's just use today's example for today's show. Today's show is called Entrepreneurs That Change the World, Changing the World to by Entrepreneurship. Social. It's about social entrepreneurship. And so this gal, Juliet, was talking. She's the creator of Miss O, which is a teens and tweens girl website that is making an impact for them, giving them direction, help, hope, life, that type of stuff. So I know that audience that I want to reach with that is social entrepreneurs, parents of teens and tweens, and I also have to be careful that those that I'm also not trying to get the wrong crowd in there. So I started doing hashtag business, hashtag social, hashtag parents, hashtag teens, hashtag tweeners. And I thought about doing hashtag girls, but when I searched that, I came up with too many porn sites. And I didn't want to having people being directed for, I didn't want porn seekers finding my stuff. I wanted
So all these hashtags in one tweet, that's a lot. Don't you think it looks spammy?
No, because of the way I constructed. I said the three shall not be mixed. I don't put those hashtags at the front. Never at the front. I never put in there like that. Like a particular hashtag might have been something like here's one: entrepreneur to change the world. I didn't hashtag entrepreneur, but I did put entrepreneur hashtag after that on the other side of the bit.ly. Because this is what I'm doing is I have a visual thing. The very first part of it, it's very clean. It's devoid of any hashtags, and all the hashtags are placed at the end where people won't care and won't notice them at the end. All they're going to see is entrepreneur to change the world. Then they'll see the bit.ly. Then they'll see the hashtags. Any other way makes it look cluttered.
Do you use a hashtag tool to help identify which hashtags are being used? Because I know it can be hard for people to come up with the right hashtags. You have to because it's if you don't use some kind of tool, you've got to figure out whether those hashtags are overused, good or not good. Okay, it's like going out in the yard and yelling over to your neighbor. If they're not in their backyard and you're yelling, barbecue in 5 minutes, and you turn around and just go back in your house, that's pointless. You actually have to make sure the window's open or they're in the backyard. You got to make sure that message gets to that person. So yeah, the best places to go is that you can go to righttag.com or maybe .org. It's one of those two. Or you go to hashtag.org. Those are great ones. There's actually a number. There's a bunch of them that I go and I do research. I think like each one of them is got different tools. So there's Hashit is Hashit HASHATIT.com. That's a good one. Hashtagify me is hashtagify.me is another good one. Hashtags.org. Right Tags is a really good one. Then also that's it. Those are the ones that I go to regularly. I don't go to just one. I like to go to get to a bunch of them to kind of figure out which ones are the best ones. So awesome. Thank you so much for all your wisdom and advice. We're at the end of our segment. How can people best stay in touch with you, Paul?
They can find me one of two ways. They can either go to my website for doubtthedoubts.com, or they can go to my website, thepotterscast.com. I'm also on Twitter at PDBLAIS. That's PD Blais, Paul David Blais. And that's the same one, same handle I have on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and you have a beautiful afternoon.
Thanks for having me. Lots of love to you, Lorna.
Likewise. Bye-bye. Thanks, folks, for listening to the Entrepreneurs for a Change podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us reach more people with inspiring stories like this one by giving us a 5-star rating in iTunes. If this podcast inspires you to join the movement of change-making entrepreneurs, we'd love to give you a jumpstart with our free Business Changemakers Toolkit, which you can download at www.entrepreneursforachange.com/join. If you have a changemaker in mind you'd love for us to interview, go to entrepreneursforachange.com/suggest and tell us who and why. Finally, feel free to stop by facebook.com/entrepreneursforachange to share your thoughts and say hello.